Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to SECON 2024. We've had a number of installments now and just growing every year. Thanks so much for the introduction. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about cybersecurity reporting. So you hear a lot about different methodologies. NIST has methodologies. There are methodologies in the cybersecurity framework, fair reporting metrics. Those are their own topics. Really, this talk is a little bit about socialization of cybersecurity reporting. As a director at three companies, Morgan Stanley, Irving, and Amera, um, one of the challenges that I had was not just finding a set of things to measure, but convincing the business that they actually had to make funding decisions on the basis of those measures. And so, really, the focus of this talk is to say, well, how do you wind up with a set of controls and that we all understand as cybersecurity professionals? And how do you translate that up the chain in a way that the business folks can understand, represent to their filings, whether that be through the Securities and Exchange or the Canadian equivalent, um, and then have that translate back to the tech folks so that they're feeling like they're being heard when they talk about their controls and the things that we tend to talk about, things like phishing, things like intrusion that make a lot of sense to us. And to us, they sound like English. They sound like things that, well, we all understand what a intrusion is. And if, that board member would just learn what phishing was, then, we could just kind of get past that. The difference is really in language and the phrase of risk and trying to align our reporting to the kinds of things that typically companies will talk about. So I'm going to start a little bit about go into board risk reporting, talking a little bit about the mechanics of translating business to tech speech, talk a little bit about organizational change. Um, I can relate to the thought that, hey, there's a boss, there's a CEO, there's a board. They say do this, that, the other, and then, it's our job to do it. Um, the trick is, and I talked about this last year, and I won't go into a lot of detail, is that people at the top of the organization have very little visibility into what goes on deeper within it. The people that are deep within it have arguably, actually almost completely, the real control about what the company does day to day. But not often the context for the business to understand the ramifications of what they do. And bridging that communication gap through reporting is really an important function of governance to make sure the company is actually doing what it wants. And a lot of that work is translation so that everybody can speak in the jargon that is most effective for them. And you can, those individuals can speak with their stakeholders at their level of abstraction in a way that's appropriate. So the difference between what boards want and what they get is largely this one that I talked about in terms of language. So the boards demand business risk reporting, and cybersecurity is often a top concern. So then the security guys are like, okay, great, give us adequate staffing, and here's what I need. Here's my shopping list. Unfortunately, everybody comes with a shopping list. And that often is the folks that, in the case of an energy company, that might be a new generation facility or a new this or that, that are a little bit more intuitive in terms of their contributions to the business than cybersecurity, where we just seem to always have our hand out. I'm joking a little bit, but there are a lot of folks that are going to the executives for money. And only the folks that can come up and say, these are the things that show up on your dashboards and go into your reporting for your stakeholders, your stockholders, your boards, your regulatory partners. Those are the things that are a little bit more real. So again, the thing that they often get as opposed to what they want feels like lack of structure. And that's again with respect to the business, lack of clarity. Again, the theme. with respect to the business and a lack of timeliness. Because to the extent that you do translation, it takes so much work and so many stakeholders have to work the reporting that frankly it's very easy to come up with a reporting scheme that only has meaningful data about a quarter or sometimes as much as a year afterwards because it takes so much work to build the reporting. So what are the properties of these different languages? So again, technical risk makes sense to us. You're evaluating various technical requirements and designs. Feels like we're speaking English. We're talking amongst technical staff, and even things that we often, again, say that sound like business risks, things like intrusion, things like phishing. Um, those are actually technical risks. They don't really mean much to the business because, I mean, to use a counterexample, so we got intruded. Do I care? Well, maybe in some parts of the business you might not, if they're not critical or they don't link to critical things. When you're talking about business risk language, you're really talking about often safety, health, legal, and you have to articulate exactly which safety, health, and legal concerns you are and map the kinds of intrusions to the kinds of business impacts. And as much as you can, you'd like to have a varied cybersecurity investment so that you're only focusing the most resources on those areas that would be most impactful to the business. And as painful as it is to say, if there are areas of the business that actually could be attacked without affecting the company at all, well, then it's only fair to say that those may not get the most investment. Now, the truth is they're often connected. I think we know that is the reality, but you have to articulate in those terms because the executives are often making decisions in those terms about deciding what parts of the company to de-invest, what to staff up. So when we use technical staff with leadership, which often happens, at the director, at even the CISO level, it is sometimes interpreted as, "Hey, board member, let me teach you my job." And then the board member is understandably kind of saying, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do my job. You do your job. You tell me how you can help me with my job." And this is really the focus of the talk, is to make sure that we're translating and really communicating. So when you're mapping technical to business, the idea is you start out with the business risks, and you'll normally have in a finance company, you'll have a chief risk officer, and they're used to doing straight up things like investment risk. They actually calculate all the numbers, right? In an energy company, you'll often have that through either a compliance director or you'll have like a CFO that will do that. And you're really looking for the person who's doing your SOX reporting. It's often a different function that's doing a lot of the insurance stuff. So you're really looking for board reporting, the folks that put out the quarterly documents to the stockholders, to the SOX, to the regulatory folks. They're representing business risk, and they will often have dashboards that talk in terms of here are the products that we produce. Here are the risks associated with those products. That's really your starting gate. And if you look at that as a cyber person, you're going like, I don't know how to map that. That's the purpose of this talk, right? So we have threat vectors, things where we talk about phishing, physical theft, those kinds of things. We have technical control areas like there's where we bring in our NIST stuff, where we'll talk about, okay, we have access control, physical security, data protection. Again, these are all technical controls. And so the idea is to take those, map those against we have certain business risk metrics and targets that we're actually often accountable or set expectations with the business stakeholders to meet. And so then the trick is taking our metrics and then casting those in terms of the business metrics. So really, from an organizational change perspective, there are a couple ways to do it. One way I've heard of, and that's really not the subject of this talk, but just for completeness, is to say benchmarking. So you say, hey, we're an energy company. We've got this much revenue. We've got this many people. If you look at our peers, this is kind of their investment. And that's frankly fairly easy. And there are companies that do that. And then that's actually fairly straightforward. And so then you're not as worried about making this translation. There are other companies, though, that are really have a fairly sharp pencil when it comes time to saying, what they're going to invest in and what they're not. And those are the ones where this is most important. So you're going to start out with the executive stakeholders. Like I said, you're going to talk to that risk officer, you're going to talk to the CFO and find out, and you'll notice those are people that whose schedule it's hard to get on. And so it's going to be the most straightforward if you can to start high and come down. Whenever you're pushing up a rope, that's going to be a harder sell. And whereas in my, and I've been in that position where I've tried to push up the organization. A lot of times, if it's not coming from the board, this is hard. I was also fortunate to be in a couple of companies where the board was making demands and uncomfortable with the level of reporting we had. And so we were able to say, hey, we're just doing what you asked. And then you can get their time and get that additional insight. If you don't have that immediate attention, I would encourage somebody to go to somebody's seniors you have access to and get them to go to that chief risk officer and just start getting the data about what that risk dashboard looks like when we go out to the stockholders and other stakeholders. So you start with the executive, confirm the business relevance of the board reporting that they're putting out. You literally try to take the pages from what it is that they're saying about their business risk, and you emulate that. You'll often find that the director on the side of safety, the director on the side of, whatever your operational, you'll often have an executive that's in charge of some sort of operational, like a COO. Sometimes you'll have a CTO in tech organizations. They have these kinds of dashboards that are talking about the products they produce. At that point, you'll have the people you're a little bit more familiar with. Folks like often the person who's in charge of insurance. You'll often have a compliance vice president or director. Those are going to be your buddies in terms of trying to take what it is around your technical controls and try to translate those. And then you're going to have the operational stakeholders. And so in case of a multi-subsidiary company, you'll often have local cyber heads. You'll often have folks that are your practitioners. And those are the folks that you want to maintain credibility with, because ultimately their data is going to be what feeds this machine. So the object of the game is to get your security performance metrics. That is, how many intrusions, hopefully not many, how many clicked on links, what are your phishing training scores, what are your backups, are your backups successful? Can you do restores? What are those metrics? You translate those to control areas. You use that in combination of their mitigation against likelihood and impact. So this is straight up NIST kind of RMF terminology, risk management framework. And then you can highlight, and when I say cyber risks, I'm saying cyber business risks. In other words, something you're going to articulate to product line A, product B, facility B, that kind of stuff. And I know that sounds like a lot, but it is really a lot more accessible to the business when you could do that. So this is a sample, and this is actually real live. I'm not going to say which company, but this is live. So this is the kind of risks I'm talking about when I say the kind of stuff that the business can understand. Data was stolen, high risk, low risk, business outage, data manipulation, insider information, litigation, failure of critical infrastructure, loss of critical third party. Those are the kinds of things that the boards understand, and they report on a lot of their compliance. So then under the hood, and I just have a couple minutes here where I'm just going to go through this really briefly and say the object of the game is you can build this in isolation. What you really want to do, especially if you have a lot of cybersecurity stakeholders, is you want to get their buy-in. And so you want to have them create weightings to map between some of these different domains. So if you start out with, okay, these are the technical control areas on the left. And you can see, these are the control areas that you'll often have in like a NIST. Then you'll have the threats on the top. And again, you just, in the workshop, put the little dots where everybody feels. This is what the dots we came up with. You may have different dots. Similarly, you say, okay, just like before we had likelihood reduction, now which ones are the impact reduction? Again, good workshop. Give everybody a chance to get the buy-in. And then mapping those threat vectors to the cyber business risk, again, is something you can do in that workshop. And you can see how we map that across. So really, at the end of the day, when you do the mapping and you map all the way up, you're just taking it in little bite-sized chunks where you take it and you say, here is a technical control I understand. Here's its associated control that you'd find in a NIST. Here are the associated business risks, the workshops to make sure everybody's bought into the process, because otherwise you can get accused of being a little bit random. The business risks, you say, well, which ones are going to impact which ones? And then once you've been able to get a couple of those steps, then you can walk it all the way through. Now you have something that's understandable to the board and also believable by the practitioner, because you don't want the practitioners saying to their leaders that, this is some random thing. You want their buy-in, but you can't just take the technical controls and just send it up the chain, because there's very, very few board members and executives that are going to understand even things that we think are fairly straightforward. If you say thing was stolen, they get that. If you say phishing, that's always a little bit hard to translate. So this was kind of a lightning round. I really appreciate the time that you all had to spend here. And I'll be in the West Lounge if you have any questions. Thanks again and take care.